The story of Dr. Goebbels's brother, Hans, is the story of Nazi nepotism. Relatives of the Nazi Party leadership rose to positions of great power and influence on the coattails of their more famous siblings, and many, like Hans Goebbels, ended up paying the price for that association at the end of the war. Dr. Joseph Goebbels is primarily remembered today as a brilliant propaganda minister who assiduously sold Nazism to the German people from the movement's wilderness years to its 12 years in power. Goebbels was famously characterized as the poison dwarf, and a less impressive example of the master race was hard to find, even among the odd assortment of characters that made up Hitler's cabinet. Goebbels was very short, and he walked with a limp, having been born with a deformed right foot. He overcompensated for his perceived lack of physicality by a strong domineering personality and stage presence, a sharp mind, and an appetite for women. Aside from fathering 6 children with his wife Magda, Goebbels used his position as Reich Minister in charge of Germany's film industry, among other things, to bed a series of glamorous movie stars. Hitler tolerated Goebbels's extracurricular activities because he was so effective a communicator and propagandist. In the end, Goebbels's loyalty to Hitler was pathological, and he moved himself and his wife and young children into Hitler's Berlin bunker to ultimately perish alongside their beloved Führer, while most of the other leaders sought to escape the final collapse of Nazi Germany. Less than 2 weeks before Dr. Goebbels' suicide in Berlin, his older brother Hans fell into American hands. It was a US propaganda victory that was fully exploited. Born in 1895, Hans Goebbels was 2 years older than Joseph. While Joseph pursued an academic path, Hans had trained as an insurance salesman, working in Bonn and Cologne until the outbreak of World War I. Joseph obviously couldn't serve in the army because of his disability, but Hans was drafted in May 1915, serving in the infantry on the Western Front. Like many of his generation, including Hitler, Hans suffered the misery and horror of trench warfare. He was ultimately captured by the French during the fighting at Verdun in 1916. This experience gave him a lifelong loathing for the French. Hans was held as a prisoner of war until 1920, forced to labor on farms, in vineyards, and in factories. His resentment at not being able to return home earlier was immense. Hans was small like his brother, only 5 foot 4 inches or 167 centimeters tall. He worked as a lowly insurance salesman until Hitler came to power in January 1933. Being the propaganda minister's brother was a distinct advantage. He had already joined the Nazi Party and in 1931 had become an officer in the SA, the Sturmabteilung, the Brown Shirts. Under his brother's influence, Hans's station in life improved dramatically. Residing in the Düsseldorf area where the family originated, Hans was appointed an official in the propaganda ministry with the rank of Kreisleiter or district leader, and became chairman of the district party arbitration court. Of more significance, Hans went from run-of-the-mill insurance salesman to general director of all fire and life insurance institutions in the Rhineland and state commissioner for insurance in Rhine province. This sudden elevation meant that Hans could implement his long-cherished, rather socialist ideas, sharing his brother Josef's interest in creating a true Volksgemeinschaft, or people's national community. Hans wanted nothing less than a social insurance policy for all Germans, a very expensive undertaking, and, of course, the nationalization of the German insurance industry, perhaps under his control. His position in the party was further burnished by promotion to SA Standartenführer or Colonel in 1934 and elevation to SA Oberführer in 1942. The SA had been smashed following the Night of the Long Knives in 1934 when Hitler had feared the SA was plotting to replace him. Most SA men ended up conscripted for military service during the war. But the original organization continued to exist at all levels of the Nazi state. An Oberführer, a strange rank somewhere between colonel and brigadier, made Hans Ggèbel's a very visible party leader in his brown and gold uniform and red party armband. But by April 1945, Hans Ggèbels, like all the other Nazi leaders, was facing oblivion. US forces had managed to encircle the Ruhr industrial region, and Düsseldorf was cut off. The city, already heavily damaged by years of Allied bombing, was expected to resist the Americans. The SA assisted the Volkssturm, the Home Guard, with defense preparations, backing up what regular army troops there were to conduct a defense. But the citizens of Düsseldorf were not prepared to simply sit back and watch their city become a battleground. A resistance movement was preparing to seize control. Gauleiter Friedrich Florian, whom Hans Ggèbels knew well, had ordered all utilities and transport infrastructure in Düsseldorf to be blown up, along with the Rhine bridges. Days before the resistance rose up, they met with local police commander Lieutenant Colonel Franz Jürgens to try and persuade him and other officials to help them stop Florian. Jürgens had just turned down command of an ad hoc battle group of armed police and local Volkssturm to be used to help fight the Americans. He agreed to help them. Codenamed Aktion Rheinland, the resistance rose on the 16th of February 1945 to enact their operation. By now, units of the US 97th Infantry Division had encircled Düsseldorf and were preparing to capture the city. Ominously, the assault was to be preceded by an 800-bomber raid that would have obliterated most of the city and killed much of its population. Colonel Jürgens and the plotters managed to capture the Düsseldorf police chief SS Brigadeführer August Korreng. Emissaries were then sent to the Americans. In the meantime, Gauleiter Florian and army troops recaptured Korreng and captured some of the resistors as well. The emissaries, however, persuaded the Americans to call off the air raid, saving the city, and they rode back into the city on US tanks to the police headquarters on the 17th of April. But Florian had already held a kangaroo trial, and 5 of the resistors had been summarily shot. The 97th Infantry Division met virtually no resistance. The role of Hans Ggèbels in all of this is not clear. He was captured in full SA uniform, perhaps at SA headquarters, a large building in the city subsequently looted by locals and US troops. Due to the nature of the US encirclement, none of the Nazi bigwigs could flee east, and the Americans nabbed not only Ggèbels but Gauleiter Florian as well. Surprisingly, Florian was acquitted at his trial for the murders of the 5 resistors, but in 1949 received a 6-year sentence for having been a Gauleiter, being released early in 1951. He died in 1975, aged 81. As for Hans Ggèbels, his propaganda value was obvious. His brother Josef was still alive and living in Hitler's bunker as the Soviets closed their ring around the city of Berlin. Arrested and held in a local prison, Hans Ggèbels was interviewed and questioned by Captain Edward Levy of the Counterintelligence Corps on the 26th of April 1945, this being filmed. The Americans had removed Hans's jackboots and tie and his medal ribbon bar and golden party badge, a high Nazi decoration he had received in 1943, but he nonetheless appeared to retain much of his arrogant demeanor. Dr. Josef Goebbels died by his own hand in Berlin on the 1st of May 1945, along with his wife, less than 24 hours after Hitler's own suicide. His 6 children had been poisoned on their parents' orders, such was their fanaticism to the Führer. As for Hans Ggèbels, he was ironically handed over to the French once more, and interned in a camp at Dietz Ost in the French occupation zone of Western Germany. According to stories, the French enjoyed humiliating Dr. Goebbels' brother. In late 1946, Hans became seriously ill, but was probably denied treatment until it was too late. He was eventually moved to a hospital at Katzenelnbogen, where he died of sepsis on the 1st of January 1947, age 52. His son was a student at Bonn University just after the war, but after graduating, his family history prevented him from finding suitable employment. The dark legacy of Dr. Ggαιμπελς lay across the next generation as well, and Lothar Ggαιμπελς killed himself in 1951. Hans Ggαιμπels' brother Konrad, who was the eldest of the three Ggαιμπels boys, who had been a Kreisleiter, a mid-ranking Nazi official just below a Gauleiter, was released from his internment on the 10th of July 1949. He was found dead in woods a few hours later. So ended the story of Dr. Ggαιμπels and his brothers. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.